And welcome back to Show of Sports Shit. I'm Corey.
And I am Austin.
And we got our second week of fantasy preview. This week we'll be doing running backs. This will be for Yahoo. So we'll give you Yahoo's top 10. Then we'll each break our own kind of top 10 down um, if we agree with Yahoo or not. So kind of what's your first thoughts when it's running backs? Because now you're getting into potential, top five picks, even maybe even number one overall pick.
Yeah, running backs, kind of what everyone thinks makes or break your roster. It's one of those where it's really hard to draft one of these with a high pick. Uh, Usually, the championship teams have a stacked roster, and they kind of get lucky on a running back somewhere. Um, but running backs, I mean, anybody in the fantasy world, you hear running backs, and you immediately just start kind of freaking out.
Yeah, so last year, obviously, we do snake draft, right? So I obviously got Nick Chubb and Saquon Barkley back to back, first and second round.
I
And
even made the comment of like, "Damn, dude, nice fucking draft so far."
yeah, and obviously, we all know how that kind of played out. I mean, you know, it's like running backs are deep, right? But at the same time, the NFL is changing so much um, with how running backs are used. I mean, there's certain offenses that yes, you can trust the running backs, and then obviously there's other offenses where think about back in the day with Andy Reid, and still, he's kind of evolving to where running backs are kind of relevant. But there was times where it was so hard to draft running backs in Andy Reid's system. I mean, he had LaShawn McCoy with the Eagles, but it's a passing league.
Yeah, it's and that's where it's hard sometimes. When you have kind of just a more of just a true runner in Derrick Henry, where do you kind of value him when it comes to some dudes who obviously are a little less at running but catch a lot more? So it's trying to evaluate kind of personal preference. How high do you draft some of these running backs compared to getting a significantly more productive receiver? I think running backs are the hardest thing to draft and kind of game plan for. That's why you hear the zero running back draft strategy anymore, just because it's such a hit or miss, and honestly, more times it's a miss. Like this last year, I got CMC. He didn't miss any games. Like
Yeah,
lucky.
especially with his injuries.
Yeah.
Right. So
So it's just hard. Running backs are probably the position that can be debated the most and the longest, as far as the rankings and how high to actually value them.
yeah, so we're really excited to get this top 10 going. First, we obviously have the show Sports Hits. So starting off number 3 today, our boy Bobby Witt, home run derby, hit 50 total home runs. So he hit 50 total. Teoscar Hernandez hit 49 total, but in the end, he just came up a couple inches short.
Yeah, I kind of like to revisit how you win those round by round. Um, I get it; it's head to head matchup, but it's hard to think a dude hit the most home runs in the home run derby and didn't win. But it was entertaining. It was kind of nice to have new faces. Had some newcomers with some old people, like not old, but veteran,
Veterans, yeah.
like Pete and whatnot. So um, all you can ask for was it to be entertaining. Off to a rough start with the national anthem.
Oh, God. Yeah, and good. I mean, obviously, you never want to hear anyone have to check themselves into rehab, but still.
Yeah, but the home run derby was entertaining. I know I've mentioned I'm always 50-50 on how I feel about my favorite players going in. Uh, so we might revisit this in a few weeks to see how Bobby returns before getting too hyped about it.
When I think back a few years ago, Salvi did home run derby. Just so happened he matched up with Pete, and that was kind of the year Pete won it. But Salvi
He hit the second most home
he hit
runs.
second most home runs. It's just
He hit the
Pete
most.
hit the most. So it's like cool, but that's awesome that Bob was able to represent the Royals. I think he did a fantastic job,
And it was home for him.
and it was home.
So
Yep,
it
he
was
was
good.
0 for 1 in the All Star game. I think the bright note is Reagans and Seth Lugo both got an scoreless inning in last night, so that was awesome. Again, it's great that the Royals are getting recognized. Super stoked for the second half of the season. Um,
Let's be honest, I think, as far as I know, the best part was they all left with no kind of injuries
yes,
or anything hindering them, which is for a team that's right now still competitive, that's really all like you care about coming out of the home run derby and all-star break is like nothing happened. They're still good. And as far as I know, they all still are.
yeah, it's kind of an important stretch here for the Royals coming out of the All Star break. I believe they start with Cleveland or Chicago, the White Sox. Um, these are again, we're getting into the point of the schedule now where White Sox have 70 losses. You got to sweep them. You not a chance that you start off the second part of the season by not sweeping the White Sox.
Yeah, at the very least, and I mean, baseball's baseball. At the very least, you have to win the series. Um, it's not one where you can drop two and feel good about winning, the final or anything. They're at the point now, middle to end of July, in a tight race across the board.
Dude,
You got to win every series.
they go White Sox, Diamondbacks, Cubs, White Sox
That's
to start the second part of the season.
it's a pretty easy. I don't want to say easy stretch. Diamondbacks are still talented. This was about the time last year they really took off uh, and found themselves in a World Series because of it. But there could be worse stretches of games to come out of an All Star break too. That's
Yeah,
for sure.
and you got a nice long home stretch. So Chicago, White Sox, and Diamondbacks and Cubs all at home before you go back on the road to the White Sox. So that's number three. Number two, I'm going to kind of swerve a little bit. We're going to stay on the Royals. Royals make a huge selection in the draft.
Mhm.
Um, I told you we didn't watch the draft, but we kind of watched the game cast of the draft. I was seeing who was getting picked. There was still a time where I thought there's still no way that they get Jack. They got Jack, and I'm fucking stoked for it.
Yeah, I mean, uh, I don't. I can't say I understand what goes into making a player number one overall. I mean, in drafts where you have like the Paul Skeens and like Steven Strasburgs, you get it. But this one was kind of a preference, a group of players who they thought could go number one overall. Uh, and his name was never mentioned, and that kind of it surprised me. A big, athletic bomber, essentially. Uh, and if you wanted to, can make him a two-way player.
Yep, Jack Tani.
So I was surprised he wasn't considered or taken higher. Uh, to get to a point in the Royals organization where we can say they walked away with the steal, uh, it feels good. Now, he could still be a
He could still
bust.
be a bust.
Nobody's
Yep.
guaranteed to be a stud outside of like the Paul Skeens and like the ones that are can't Bobby. When you drafted him and he was immediately compared to like Fernando Tatis, like some of those can't miss. You get it,
Yep.
but for the Royals to be able to walk away from a Royals draft feeling like they got a steal, uh, I think that's a good direction that this organization's going.
So welcome to Kansas City, Jack Caglione, 6'5", 250, out of Florida. He's a Gator. Dude hits 516-foot jacks. When he hits a ball, he hits a ball. And I'm already envisioning him with Bobby right there in the middle. Um, it's hard not to. Obviously, he's not going to be up tomorrow. But this is a guy who could come up by the end of the season this year, maybe. Um, and I think he, as long as if they decide that, hey, we're going to use your bat, we're not going to worry about the pitching. I think he's up this year. But if they decide that, hey, we're going to go ahead and give him a true shot at the two-way, I don't see him coming up this year. I think they let him work through. But either way, I'm excited for it. It's nice to see the Royals being the talk of the draft. We're not used to that. Um, and then even with their second round pick, people were saying that they got another steal with the high school lefty. So bright future ahead.
Let me also do a side note. Uh, just because we talk a lot of shit on the Cardinals, we can't look past the fact that one of the two main people that were projected to go number one overall fell to them, and they ended up getting not necessarily a position of need. You can move middle infielders around; they're usually pretty athletic and can do that. But it was a pretty good get for them as well, where they were sitting and getting one of the top two pre-draft prospects where they were. So kudos to them. I still hate them, but they got a good one that fell to them.
Yeah, J.J. Weatherford,
Yep.
West Virginia shortstop. I saw some hamstring issues may hamper him, so if he can get through the hamstring part of it, it could be a steal. Him and Mason Win up the middle could be kind of dangerous. Or you could even look at him being possibly a Nolan Arenado replacement in a few years. Uh, but again, the injuries kind of hampered him from being that number one overall pick. So state of Missouri, Kansas City, and St. Louis both getting kind of a steal. And then now we'll move to number one. I know you could care less about this, and you were kind of LOLing me when I told you this was going to be number one. Denver signed their guy, Quinn Miners, 4 year, $80 million, $45 million guaranteed, makes him the third highest paid guard. Uh, we kind of talked last night when we saw that the news broke. Sean Payton loving his interior linemen. You kind of listed off the guys that he had in New Orleans. I think Quinn Miners is up there with those guys, and I think it's a good, foundation for what they want to do. And I think they'll get back to running the football, and we'll preview this in a few weeks, but I won't get too far into it. But what do you think? Deserving or maybe a little overpaid?
I I love my trenches, so it's hard. It's hard for me to say these players are getting more than they necessarily deserve. Um, Denver and Sean Payton clearly think this guy deserves it, and that's really what matters. Proud of the dude for getting paid. I remember when Denver drafted him, and they were showing highlights of him, like,
Beating the shit out of a
he
tree?
had beer belly, hanging out, just being a dude. I kind of became a fan of him then. It's hard for me to, I don't know. I guess I don't watch enough Denver to know how great he actually is. Um, but with the contracts going out, I mean, everything but running backs is starting to balloon as far as contracts go. But I mean, it's good for him. Uh, we know he's not a bad player. So, barring any kind of severe injuries that we don't wish on anybody, I don't think it's going to be a contract you look back on and you're upset about.
Yeah, the dude's nasty. He's everything you want in an interior guy. Uh,
I
yeah,
will say it sucks as a Chiefs fan because we're trying to pay Trey Smith.
exactly.
Uh,
So you don't necessarily reset the market, but you definitely kind of set the bar, right? So like he's the third highest paid. So now you're looking, and Trey Smith's probably like, well,
I'm right in that ballpark with
it,
him. Like,
exactly.
I'm still a really good interior lineman. So, if anything, I kind of hate it because I think that puts Trey Smith out of affordable for the Chiefs.
Yeah,
Uh, so that's a double-edged good sword for Denver.
it is. But now the big piece of this sword is Pat Surtain. Now, I mean, you have to pay him. There's no way he's gonna. I think Quinn Miners maybe gave you a somewhat of a discount. Um, I mean, he's a D3 player. I mean, D3 comes up, does fine. Pat Surtain's not that. Pat Surtain is definitely top five corner. He's going to want to be paid like top five corner. So we'll see how the rest of that goes and see if they do it before the start of the season or if this is one that they wait until after the season. But either way, congrats to Quinn Miners. Well deserving. Looking forward to seeing the dude play this season, hopefully injury free. So now let's get to what we've been waiting for. This is the top 10 fantasy running backs per Yahoo. Is there anything you want to say before we get into this list? I mean, you kind of touched on earlier that, you know, projections and rankings for running backs can be kind of tricky. Um, I know in previous leagues that we've played in, it's so damn hard. It's so damn hard for running backs just because everyone takes 3 to 4, right? So then I mean, by,
You need 30 or 40 running backs.
and by the time you get to the waivers, holy shit! Like, there's nothing. Like you gotta hope that you can get one of those guys that are in the 40s and 50 range, right?
Well, and I know we mentioned we don't hope for injuries, but when you're in fantasy football, uh, almost every team is going to draft 1 to 2 promising handcuffs,
Yeah,
whether it's to your own or somebody else's.
yeah,
Just because that's what you have to have a certain amount of running backs. Uh, you still don't necessarily wish for an injury, but you're a lot less hurt if the dude gets hurt who's ahead of your handcuff on the bench. But yeah, you need 30, 40 running backs. Uh, Waiver wire, you might have 1 to 2 running backs a year
yeah.
that'll you can get from the waiver wire that will actually be a reliable RB1 or 2.
Mhm.
Uh, So drafting running backs is important, and it's a crapshoot. You just have to get lucky, honestly. I mean, that's all. It's luck.
So what we'll do is we'll read from 10 to 1 for Yahoo. I'll give you my 10, and then we'll let Austin give his 10, and then we'll kind of go through some of the ones that that aren't in the top 10 or either of our top 10s, and we'll kind of give you some names to possibly look for kind of in the mid rounds, the 8 to 11 round type thing, or maybe even sooner. You know, I know it can be tricky. Everyone kind of has their strategies. Um, me in the past, I've done the no quarterback, no receiver type thing, and I went strictly running backs. Or a few years ago, when I went just straight receivers, my first 4 out of 5 picks, 3 out of 4 picks. So running backs can be tricky. So we'll start with number 10 per Yahoo. So this is Yahoo's top 10 fantasy running backs. Number 10 is Josh Jacobs, Green Bay. Number 9 is Isaiah Pacheco, Kansas City. Number 8, Kyron Williams, the Rams. Number 7, Derrick Henry, first year with Baltimore. That's going to be a little weird to see still. Number 6, Saquon, Philadelphia now. That'll also be extremely
Hella
weird.
weird.
Number 5, Jameer Gibbs, Detroit. Kind of came on strong there at the end of the last season. Number 4, Jonathan Taylor, hopefully back and healthy. I know he battled some injuries last year, so we'll kind of see how that goes. Number 3, Bijan Robinson. Hopefully this coaching staff doesn't fuck up and actually uses him correctly. Number 2, Breece Hall, the Jets. Number 1, obviously CMC. Your initial thoughts on Yahoo's top 10?
I don't really like it. I mean, the players that are there probably deserve to be there. Um, Maybe not necessarily the order, but then again, it's everyone's preference. I think they're basing theirs off their projections for points, and they have an algorithm. And if I took a serious amount of time and tried to break it down, maybe would be close. But I kind of have a different preference than they do. But I think the players in the top 10 are probably deserving. Just maybe not the right order.
Right. So now my top 10. So again, and I'll read if where they were. I'll go start with number 10, Kyron Williams. I have him down 2 from what Yahoo had him at. Josh Jacobs, number 9. Number 8, Derrick Henry. Number 7, Pacheco. Number 6, Jonathan Taylor, which is down 2. Number 5, Saquon. I think that's up 1. Number 4, Jameer Gibbs, +1. And then my top 3, it's kind of the same 3. Bijan Robinson. Number 2, Breece Hall. Number 1, obviously CMC. We'll go ahead and start with the obvious one. I think CMC has a good chance of being your number 1 overall pick in your drafts. He's kind of the everything in that offense. Played a full season last year, so that obviously was good news. So again, he's still that risk of, you take him first overall. Does he stay healthy? Uh, in that offense, I think they have enough weapons where they were able to use him smart. That
Yeah, he wasn't getting 35 touches a game.
no,
And then Carolina getting 20 carries and 15 targets. Like, it was nice for the games he played, but it really limited his games played. So that does help.
yeah, he
Uh,
didn't have George Kittle, Debo Samuel, and
I
Brandon
agree.
Ayuk and those guys around him in Carolina. So
Yeah, I think there's too much upside for CMC to not take number 1 overall. I actually think I got him number 2 overall because Justin took Jefferson, I believe.
yeah,
But CMC, hell, even if he gives you 12 games, he's just such a huge fantasy weapon uh, that for even 12 games, it's still worth that pick. Uh, I I know he's the number 1 running back, but he'd be hard pressed for me to not rank him number 1 overall for fantasy.
yeah, and I know that on mine I had Derrick Henry down 1 to number 8, and I know that's probably not popular. Um, I don't know what that offense is going to do, right? I don't necessarily know because they're going to use him. Obviously, that's a lot of wear and tear that he's probably going to have. Tennessee was kind of strategized how they used him the last couple of years. I know that one year he's hurt for 4 weeks and was still leading the NFL with 900 rush yards. Um, that's kind of my sleeper, and not really necessarily a sleeper, I guess, but he's one that obviously could end up being in the top 3, just depending on how they use him. And obviously, Baltimore doesn't have Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins anymore. Um, not quite ready to sell myself on Derrick Henry. I do like Pacheco just because he's a goal line guy. I think the touches will be there. I know Kansas City likes to get fancy with what they do, but the dude has big playability. Anytime he touches the ball, he could end up being, I think, top five. It's still kind of a push, just because I know that Andy's not known for obviously using his receivers. So, what are your thoughts on the Pacheco and Derrick Henry? And I know we'll get to your list here shortly.
Yeah, and it could be that I've had a love for Derrick Henry ever since he came in the league. So mine might be a little biased, but I am ready to sell my soul on him. Pacheco, I don't think he's a top 10 fantasy running back. Uh, he's what I would classify as a extremely safe
Yeah,
running back.
absolutely.
I don't think he'll throw in a random 20 plus point game, but he's mostly going to be in that 12 to 15 point range every week just because he's going to get 40 to 60 rush yards. He's going to get 3 to 4 catches for another 20 to 40 yards. He'll throw in a touchdown here or there. Uh, I feel like top 10, you're kind of looking more explosive, more consistent, high games, big games.
Hmm.
I don't see that with him just because A, it is Andy, and B, we still have Patrick. Um, not to take away from him and his talent, he's more of what I would put as a safe pick. But he also has a little bit of an injury history that's only going to get worse with his running style. Let's be honest.
Hmm.
He will miss some games here or there. That's just a fact. And him not being the 20, 25 point game like CMC is, that's why I would put the huge difference between them because they're both probably going to at least miss a few games. The difference is when CMC's playing, he's going to win you some weeks.
Yep.
Uh, Pacheco would be more of a high,
He could,
extremely high running back too.
and he could get you like a 20-point game one week, and the next week get you like 8.
Yes.
You never know with what his touches are going to look
Yep.
like. Chiefs game plan differently every week.
I will say you nailed it though. Like he could be a sleeper. Like if we do use him more at the goal line, if we do throw to him a little more, then we can start to go. But I'm just going off the track record with Andy. I mean, shit. Even when he took over with Jamal, there were games where Jamal would get 7 touches.
Yep.
That's just how Andy is. Uh, I love Pacheco as a player. I love the abilities he has, but you have to look at the situation he's in. Uh, he would be my ideal running back too, which would mean he'd be more in like the 11 to 14 range than top 10. But maybe running backs are so shallow that
He does sneak
he
in.
sneaks into here.
Yeah.
So I get it.
So one of the ones, and before we get to your list, the one that I'm kind of really curious on is Bijan Robinson. Last year, Falcons had no idea how to use him. They were so strung out on Algier, I mean, Algier was okay. He obviously got him the touchdowns. That offense, just in general, was ass. They didn't know how to use Kyle Pitts.
Well, they didn't have play callers. They didn't have the quarterback.
And you would think with Arthur Smith last year, they would have ran the ball more because I mean, he came from Derrick Henry, right?
Yep.
He got Derrick Henry the ball, so I was kind of toying with the idea of putting Bijan too, but I don't know how they're going to use him, and I don't know what that offense is going to look like. Kirk Cousins now.
I think with the Falcons, with their main guys as far as Bijan, Pitts, and London go, I think it's safe to say that they will all be better than they were last year. Uh, Bijan being the biggest question mark, just because you don't know running back usage week to week when they have a dude like Algier. Uh, they seem to love him. I believe it's a new coaching staff though, so who knows if their love is still tied to him or not. But uh, he would be one that if he's going to get too high for my liking, but uh, he's one that I'd be excited to get if it was for at the right spot in the draft.
Yeah, so let's kind of read through yours, and we'll go. Once you read yours off, we'll kind of get more in depth on what we're thinking running back wise. Um, the bottom part of yours, you kind of shook up quite a bit, so I'm excited for you to kind of go through yours and then kind of explain your thoughts on what you're seeing at the bottom.
Yeah, so number 10, I had Devon Achan. That's up one from what Yahoo had, so they had him at 11. 9, I had
Yeah,
Travis
Travis.
Etienne. That's up 3 for what Yahoo had. Josh Jacobs 8. That's up 2. Jameer Gibbs, that's down 2 for where Yahoo had him. I had him at 7. Saquon at 6. That's right where Yahoo had him, so I agree. Breece Hall at 5, which was the big drop on my board. I have him at 5 instead of 2. Jonathan Taylor at 4 and Bijan Robinson at 3, same as Yahoo. At 2, I had Derrick Henry, uh, which you can guess from where Corey and Yahoo's list were. That was the biggest jump for me. That's plus 5. And then I still have CMC at 1. So, like I mentioned earlier, I am willing to sell my soul for Derrick Henry returning to normal Derrick Henry form on an offense he's never been in before.
Yeah, so let's start with number 9, Travis Etienne. Solid pick, honestly. Um, kind of give us your thoughts on what you like about him in fantasy and why you bumped him into your top 10.
He's kind of their guy. Um, I know they spell him a little bit, uh, but he's still their receiving back. He's still their goal line back.
Chemistry factor with Trevor Lawrence, obviously dating back to Clemson, so
Yeah, I mean,
passes are there.
you got to look at like we were talking with Pacheco. You just don't know what its usage was each week. 18, you kind of know he's going to get 90 to 95% of the running back touches.
Yep.
Uh, to me, I like that. It's a little different than the Achan one. They rotate backs. He only needs 5 to 10 touches a game to fucking just go off.
Yeah, he can take those handoffs and go 80 yards. They can
Exactly.
also take a screen, 80 yards.
I like his upside. His isn't necessarily touches, but he's in a good scheme. Uh, he makes production with less. Um, I kind of can understand why who put him 11 just because
Right.
you don't really know what his touches will be either. Um, but he's way too damn talented and fast to not have a 10. I mean, he has the ability to drop 20 points a week on 8 touches.
Especially if you're in PPR too. So I know we do PPR. Um, so that does add some value to guys like CMC and Travis Etienne. I mean, CMC is obviously going to get his points no matter what, PPR or not. Travis Etienne definitely kind of the poor man's CMC, where he's obviously not as good as Christian McCaffrey, but he still has that value, and that's what we're talking about here is value. So let's go to number 5, Breece Hall. You had him down 3. I know you're not as high on the Jets and the Aaron Rodgers factor. Kind of go in a little bit more on your thoughts of Breece Hall down 3 to number 5.
Yeah, and it's no disrespect to his talent. If this was a talent list, he probably would be up kind of where Yahoo had him. I still think he's going to be a very good fantasy running back. Um,
Yeah, I mean top 5. He's
yeah,
still top 5. So I mean, it's still
yeah, and early on in the season, I can see his numbers being boosted a little bit while working Aaron back.
yep.
Um, and I know Rodgers always had 1 or 2 really good fantasy backs with him in Green Bay. But I do think as the season goes on, they're going to lean on Breece Hall a little less, uh, which is why I kind of bumped him down. You know, the first 1 to 4 weeks, he could be top 1 or 2.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but kind of towards the juicy part of the schedule and fantasy playoffs, I could really see uh, his usage really dip down with Rodgers kind of getting back to full strength. Uh, but you also have to worry. They have a couple linemen who are like 40. Uh, they have a quarterback who's damn near 40. That team's one slight bump away from their season being wrecked again.
Yep.
Um, this is one of those picks where if it goes how it's supposed to, he could very easily finish second. But seasons for every team don't usually go how it's. I mean, look at the Chiefs last year.
Right.
No one saw that shit. Which I bumped him down just because I feel like there's a lot more risk in him uh, with his surrounding parts, and I still just don't like their offensive coaches, if I'm being honest. So, really good guy, can still be a really good back. If everything goes to plan and he is the 5th running back taken and it goes to plan, you got to steal. So, for me, too much risk to have higher than 5.
Yeah, speaking of the coaches, Denver fans, we all know too well. Good old Nate Hackett. Uh, Everything I saw was he's not going to be the play caller this year. They brought someone else to kind of be the offensive like he's the analyst, or I don't remember who it is. And I mean, either way, they weren't planning on Nathaniel Hackett calling plays last year. It was going to be Aaron Rodgers, obviously, and it probably will still be Aaron Rodgers this year. So if Aaron does stay healthy and Aaron maybe boosts their points up from like 12 points a game to 20 points a game, so maybe someone else will give Hackett a shot to make a dick of himself.
Mhm.
But yeah, I agree. You just don't know. Yes, their offensive line is going to be improved, but they're old. We were looking through some of the free agent offensive line that they picked up. We won't get into all that. That doesn't really have any bearing on this. I mean, it does kind of affect his fantasy numbers and what he's doing. Um, but again, I mean, not all these guys in the top 10 have top notch offensive lines. I mean, even Saquon with the Eagles, I mean, they're going to have a new makeshift offensive line with what they're doing, but that's still going to be a run dominant team. So, I mean, just because they don't have a decent offensive line, or we just don't know what the offensive line is going to look like, doesn't mean that necessarily affects too much of their fantasy numbers. Um,
Yeah, that's kind of what I want to point out. I may have mentioned it during the quarterback list that we did last week, but I don't think so. I What we're doing, I would highly advise not necessarily writing it out or anything. Like you can still use these lists, but you don't have to draft with what the pre-draft rankings are.
no,
If there's a running back of 14 that you love and you're sitting at 8, you don't have to take who they have best listed. Like think for yourself. Uh, you know, even on my list, they think Derrick Henry will be a back end running back 1. I think he's going to be +5. So if I'm sitting there at 8 or 9 where they have him and he's there, you bet your sweet ass I'm going to take him because to me that's a value pick. You you have to think they know as much as we do. It's all guessing. None of us really know how he's going to do, how any of these guys are going to do. That's my one tip for like think for yourself. Don't have to draft off of what these quote unquote expert lists say. Um, if you do that, you're already a step ahead of most people because a lot of people use these lists to do their drafts.
yeah. So let's kind of list off some people that didn't make either one of our top tens and not on Yahoo's top 10. Obviously, number one for me that sticks out is Austin Eckler.
Damn,
We
that's what I was going to
Yeah.
say.
So we talked about this again, and we talk a lot about this off the mic and whatnot. But that gives us something to kind of bring to you guys and bring what we're talking about. Yeah, he goes to Washington. Yes, they already have a running back there. I don't think that's going to affect how they use Austin Eckler.
I think it'll actually benefit him. Uh,
Yeah, because I mean, you think back to his Chargers days, Justin Kelly, Isaiah Spiller, um, not good, right? I mean, Justin Kelly, I picked Justin Kelly up a couple times, and he had a couple good games, but it wasn't a guy that I was going to leave in every week. It was just I'm going to plug him in now because I don't have a spot for whoever or someone was on my week, or last year in my case, I had two guys who got hurt within 2 weeks of each other. Now you're going into Washington where they have Robinson. Um,
but let's think of that situation from a fantasy perspective. Um, Obviously, anything can happen, but going into the season, we don't expect. I forgot their name now. I was about to call them football team.
Commanders.
Commanders football team. They should have stuck with it. Um, as much as we like their quarterback and the coach that they got, they're not going to be winning many games. So late in games, he's going to be the receiving back. So not only is he going to get his touches that he would normally get, kind of in beginning of games, but in most games he should be on the field playing catch up.
Yeah.
You had Daniels at quarterback, rookie quarterback. Uh, I do believe there will be some high amount of dump downs. Um,
And I think so too, just because they have Cliff Kingsbury.
yeah,
So we kind of saw how he ran offense in Arizona with Kyler Murray. It's going to be quick hitters. They're not going to sit there and they're not going to, they may, they may have an explosive here and there.
they'll
But
drop some deep shots.
yeah, but you're still looking at quick hitters, the curls, the sticks, the swing passes, everything to get Daniels into a rhythm. and I think Austin Eckler obviously brings the passing aspect of he can catch, but
His da
he
his
also leads the NFL in touchdowns the last few
well, and I
years.
was gonna say he's not gonna get his normal, like, 18 rushing touchdowns. Uh, I mean, if he does, that's gonna be one hell of a steal.
That's why they're going to still use him because the dude can
Yes.
still score
He's
touchdowns.
not
I
talented.
know he had an injury stuff last year and all the other contract stuff and whatnot, but
The
it,
dude's still
it's
talented.
still talent. It's still talent, and I would start questioning coaching if they cut his stuff in half. Like you're still going to use him.
Yeah, they didn't give him the contract they did not to use him. Um, I kinda feel disrespectful now for not having him towards the end of my top 10. I think he's earned that. That's why I think you're spot on him being your kind of big name that's not on these lists. Uh, Outside of injuries, the dude's been one of the most reliable. It was always him and CMC were the two cheat codes. Uh, he's on a new team. He's had some injury issues. I get that, but the dude's still talented.
So if you're in a league with people that don't know how to draft and what they're doing, and you still see Austin Eckler in there in the fourth, fifth round, and you're like, oh shit, I need a running back because I went receiver heavy, or your draft strategy didn't have you taking running back earlier or whatnot. Don't be embarrassed or think it's question yourself if you have to take Austin Eckler. I would absolutely take Austin Eckler. Um, I don't think it's going to be a running back by committee. I still think he's going to benefit. I still think he's going to be just fine with the Commanders. So that's kind of all I have to say on the Austin Eckler part. So what do you got?
Yeah, I have two, and they kind of go together, which is why I'm going to list them. My first one is Zach Moss with the Bengals. Uh, Everyone thinks of Joe Burrow and their receivers and whatnot they have there. But when everyone's healthy on that offense, Joe Mixon was still very high floor. Uh, Zach Moss proved with the Colts last year when Jonathan Taylor was injured
That's exactly what I was going to say.
that
Yep.
he's not bad. He's actually quite good.
Held his own.
Yeah. Now he's going to an offense that's pretty loaded. If Joe Burrow in that passing game perform kind of how they should, I think Zach Moss is going to be a very reliable option. And that takes me to my second one is Joe Mixon. Uh, Kind of got a little hate towards the end of his time in Cincy, but he was still reliable. He wasn't busting the 50 yarders anymore, but he was still getting touchdowns. He would still well above average on catching. And now he goes to the Texans, that is just as loaded as his previous team, if not more.
Yeah.
Um, I know they still have some good backs there in Houston, but they didn't get him to not have him be their guy.
They needed the all around running back. So
Yeah,
like Singletary did pretty decent for him last year. He was kind of turned into their all around. Obviously Pierce is still there. He was their runner. Well, not so good in the passing game. But this guy brings everything.
yep.
Pass blocking, pass catching, running the ball. So solid pick.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of running backs that I can list that people are probably going to have rated all over the board. You still have Kamara. Um,
Which who I was gonna bring up.
you still have DeAndre Swift. Uh, Injury issues, I know. New looking offense there as well in Chicago, so who knows? Um, but you still have some of the other second running backs on teams like Montgomery, or not Montgomery. Who's the other one in
Where?
Detroit now? Is it Montgomery?
Yeah, it is Montgomery.
It is Montgomery.
It
That's
is.
right. Uh, he's still reliable. Last year, I was really big on Jamal Williams as number two. Not so much this year. But you still have like the AJ Dillons of the world. They're not just going to go away from him. We're kind of getting down there now where these are more flex options than anything.
Mhm.
Um, but this is just going to show that you don't have to freak out and overdraft running backs. You know, if your top two running backs were, you know, Zach Moss and Austin Eckler, I think you'd be sitting okay. If your third running back is an AJ Dillon or even Gus Edwards with San Diego or Los Angeles now, um, you could be worse off. And it's just an example of you don't have to freak out on running backs. Um, Top 30 running backs don't have to go in the top 40 picks. You don't have to ruin the draft for everyone. Um, is it nice to have one of these top 10 guys? obviously.
Yeah.
Um, but running backs are deeper than people think. They're just not as top heavy. Uh, Receivers, I think, are deeper, which is why you kind of just draft to how it falls to you. Don't go in thinking you need two running backs right away. Um, there could be more running backs that we're not even thinking of off the top of our head. Who knows? Denver, Javante Williams might be all right, but there's a lot of running backs out there still that you'll be fine if you don't happen to get one of these top 10 that we listed.
Yeah. So don't sleep on Alvin Kamara. All right. He was suspended the first part of last season. I know he has contract issues right now, so he held out of kind of the OTAs and mandatory camps. Uh, they still use him. They're still going to use him. He's still producing at a high level. Um, I know it's Derek Carr. He's still a good quarterback. All right. It's still a good offense. Still got a good offensive line. He's another one. Brings it all around. He'll catch the ball. They throw to him a shit ton. They run him at the goal line. He can still break off and get you 3 touchdowns in the game if needed. Um, so absolutely do not sleep on Alvin Kamara. Javante Williams, I'm still up in the air about how Denver's going to use their running backs this year. Uh, I still don't think he was fully healthy from his massive leg injury he had. This is his first full healthy offseason, I think. But I know Sean Payton loves P. Ryan, even though they only used him in passing situations last year, which blew my mind. Jaleel McLaughlin. So, I mean, maybe later on, if you need, I would go Javante out of those three, but I wouldn't worry about Javante in the top half of the draft just because you don't necessarily know how he's going to be used. I know Denver's going to run the ball, but I still think that might end up being a running back by committee because Sean does like those quick, running backs out of the backfield. And I started using Jaleel McLaughlin a little bit more towards the end of the season last year. Uh, Plus, Denver played behind quite a bit last year too, so that kind of had a huge bearing on it. So Javante is someone you can look forward to later on in the draft, I think. But I would caution, for fantasy purposes, I would caution people on taking Javante, you know, top half.
Yeah, I'm just sitting here thinking about all the running backs we haven't named. Um, you know, can't believe we did, but Rashad White with the Bucks,
He was named,
uh,
yeah.
James Conner, touchdown machine. Najee Harris kind of had a decent bounce back year last year. One that I'm surprised I haven't because I've had him every year that he's been in the league. Kenneth Walker. Um, like this is proven our point that there are running backs out there. Uh, I'm sure we can go. I mean, you still have Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears in Tennessee. I mean, there are running backs out there. Hell, that list I just received, like just listed out right now, could be your roster of running backs, and I think you'd be sitting pretty good. Like, there's running backs to be had. You don't have to think Aaron Jones in Minnesota. Who's to think he's not going to be any good? So we can go up and down and realize that they're just really good running backs
And I think
across the league.
and I think Arizona has that sneaky offense right now. I mean, even with new coaching staff last year, James Conner still got his. So I don't see why they go away from that. I don't think they necessarily want to keep putting all the pressure on Kyler when you have a running back that can catch the ball. They ran screen game really good last year. Uh, when you get inside the red zone, James Conner was pretty good. Um, so I think that's a sneaky. I think that's a sneaky pick. If he's there later on in your draft, I would take a flyer on him. I
Yeah,
mean, if he's there, I mean, they're at least going to use him. He's their starting running back. Uh, I know they picked up a couple guys last year, but that didn't necessarily affect anything. I think it was just one. I think Connor did get a couple injuries last year, but nothing too serious. But they cut back just a little bit on what he was doing. Um, Tony Pollard, good running back. He filled in good for Zeke, but he just wasn't quite ready for the number one position with the Cowboys. Uh, that could help Will Levis out in Tennessee a little bit. Um,
and you saw like the other Miami running back in Jeff Wilson. You have Buffalo's running back in James Cook. I think I've listed basically at least a running back per team at this point where
Ramondre Stevenson, New England.
shitty team, but they used him because it's really all they got.
Yeah, we don't know. We don't know what Patriots are going to do. If it's Jacoby Brissett, which we think it's going to be to start the season at least.
You
But
even have Nick Chubb at some point coming back.
I saw a workout video of him yesterday, fucking squatting like 600 pounds. I was like, oh, okay. Obviously, that doesn't necessarily mean he's ready for contact, but I mean, he's making good progress. Jerome Ford was a good fill-in. Obviously, I had to pick him up last year. Actually, I think I traded for him. Someone snatched him off the waiver wire, but again, I was desperate. So um, outside of that, I mean, again, you think of handcuffs. Who's kind of your handcuff that you're monitoring?
We kind of always look at whoever the Niners backup is going to be, especially if you draft CMC. One of your first bench picks should be the handcuff to him. Your hope is you never use them. But me personally, I'd rather have them and never need them than need them and not have them. Uh, that being said, you kind of also look at other dudes who have been getting the rock no matter what. We touched on it earlier. So Algier, again, you're probably not going to draft him to start. But if anything does happen to Bijan, he's there. And then you also run into the opportunity if you need him in a bye week, if the Falcons continue using him the same, he's good to have. Um, you kind of have, the second back in Detroit, like I said. Uh, who knows if Gibbs can carry the whole wear and tear, how the breakdown's going to be. One of the two running backs in Miami,
AJ
AJ
Dillon.
Dillon.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Handcuffs are pretty valuable. Um, I would say the number one handcuff is always CMC's, especially now that he's in San Fran. It's a little harder when he was in Carolina because a backup couldn't do what he was doing in that offense. But on the Niners, whoever it is, whoever it decides to be the backup, that's who you should try to target. Even if you don't draft CMC, it doesn't hurt to draft his handcuff. One of two reasons: if CMC gets hurt, you have an RB1, or you can use it as a trade chip for whoever has CMC. Not everyone values handcuffs, so they may not want to do that. But depending on your league, someone might value that. So uh, that's really the one I would say you should target is the backup to CMC.
Yeah, and again, when you do the handcuffs, you're basically sacrificing a bench spot for a guy that may be able to be a filler, especially when you start hitting into the bye weeks. Um, I know there was one year you played uh, Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon both. You had Aaron Jones as your starter, obviously, and then AJ Dillon as like his handcuff slash. Hey, I'm just going to play both of them because they both get touches. And AJ Dillon was on a little streak of getting touchdowns and goal line looks, so I think it panned out for you in the end.
Well, a few years ago, I used Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams
That's who.
against the Chiefs.
Yeah,
And then I think it was last year or the year before, I used Jamal Williams and was it Montgomery in Detroit?
yeah,
Was that the two headed back?
yeah,
I used both of them. No, it was Swift and Jamal that I used both in Detroit.
yeah,
I'm not afraid to do that either if the offense is there.
yeah. So we're absolutely not condoning that. We're telling you should do that.
We've done some crazy shit in fantasy, like the 1 week where my opponent left a questionable player in, and there was one game left, so I went and picked up like the 5 possible replacements, and then a couple other people in the league went and scooped up the rest. So when he didn't play, he couldn't beat me. So like, do whatever it takes to win, whether they call you a bitch for it or not. Like, do what you want to do, man. This is fantasy. Like, it's your team. Do what you want, but just always make sure you have a valid lineup.
Yeah, always make sure you have a valid lineup, especially when you're playing for quite a bit of money, like we do. That wraps up running backs this week. Next week is going to be receivers, tight ends. That'll wrap up our fantasy talk. We're not going to get too far in to the defenses and kickers and all that. Um, so it'll be still a top 10 list, receivers and tight ends. I know it'll be kind of a jam pack going through two groupings. Uh, I know we're super excited about the receivers, and there's a few tight ends that we're super excited about. I believe just a little preview. I know you were high on Trey McBride. I saw that he was up there pretty high on the rankings for tight ends, and he kind of Not necessarily comes out of nowhere, but fits in with what they're doing and becomes reliable. So we have that to look forward to. Um, Again, make sure you follow us on Instagram, like our posts. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Leave us your feedback. Next week wraps up fantasy talk, and then we dive into some fucking training camp. Football's almost here, 50 days away from the Chiefs Ravens kicking off the season. Can't be any more excited than what we are. Just think that's 7 weeks from tomorrow that football finally starts.
Yeah, I can't wait. And don't hesitate to leave us who your sleeper pick is or your top pick is for running back or anything like that. Any questions, feedback, comments, we'll definitely talk about it in the following episode and give you a shout out and make sure that we have some good feedback and conversations with you listeners. So anything you have, please do share.
If you guys want to come on the show, kind of bullshit, talk some fantasy football, let us know. We'll always take special guests. We're still working on getting some video to go along with our podcast, so those will be coming soon. Until next week, we'll see you guys then.